Hello and welcome to SHOWstudio's fully digital live panel discussions. This season's experts from all parts of the industry will discuss and debate the most important subjects affecting the fashion industry. Today, we're rounding up Couture Fashion Week in Paris. But first of all, we're just going to introduce all of the panel, and we're going to start with Gareth.
Hi guys, I'm Gareth Chow. I am a freelance fashion consultant and also a postgraduate student from Cass Business School.
Iris.
Hi, I'm Iris Liz. I'm a journalist and artist specialized in technology.
Joshua.
Sure. Hi, I'm Joshua James Small. I'm a sustainable women's wear designer, freelance writer and model with First Model Management.
And lastly, KK.
Hi, I'm KK Obi. I'm a menswear stylist and the creative director of Boy Brother Friend.
Great, okay. And I suppose this is a very different panel for us because usually we're all in a room together. So I'm expecting there to be minor delays and twitches, but I'm sure we'll be fine with it all as well. So just to start, as Couture Fashion Week started, I think it'd be really great if we started with the message from Naomi Campbell. So Bella, if we could play that would be fantastic. Reference image.
I do apologise, I don't have any sound.
So you guys haven't seen this either, have you? Hear what?
No.
No.
I get it.
Well, anyway, she's introducing everybody to Fashion Week. She's celebrating.
I've seen it actually. Sorry.
Yeah, she's celebrating diversity, inclusivity, sustainability. So it's really nice. She's talking about Black Lives Matter. She's talking about where we are at this point with the virus, etc. as well. So it's a really nice sort of introduction as well. So I'm guessing that this is everybody else is being able to see this who's streaming this. Is that right? And hear it?
Should be possible to view it. We can't hear it at the moment, unfortunately.
But the people who are tuning in, they can hear it all though, right?
Anyone here on the panel?
So no, we can't stream audio because of copyright.
Okay, but I mean, but the people who are watching this live stream, they can hear it though, right?
They can't hear it either. So because if we play music, it will get flagged.
I think it will be linked on the British Fashion Council website, right? So I'm sure that can be put into the
Put it in the description at the end.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for.
Okay, and so what, should we just talk over the top of it and just do that, Bella?
Yeah, I think what would be great is if I know KK and Lyall, I know you've watched it. So if you want to talk about some of the things that happened in it, and then what I'll do is I'll keep playing them as images, but if you kind of give the context, realise that's not quite as good as having Naomi herself say in her words, but maybe your impressions of them, if that would be okay. I can restart the video as so you can talk about like kind of the general context of why what she brought up, you know, particularly the choice of clothes that she chose to wear with the phenomenally black t-shirt, things like that. So we can start over from sort of the beginning of that video if you want.
Okay, let's do that.
Awesome.
KK, how fresh is it in your mind what she says? Did you watch it in the last couple of days?
What, me?
Yeah, you.
Yes, I did. Sorry. Liar. Yes, I think, I mean, obviously she's kind of like sort of trying to like set a new tone for Paris Fashion Week, which is obviously you know, in a very digital phase, which I think is very new for them. I think she's obviously like sort of aligning or talking through everything that's going on in the world, and you know, and sort of on top of that, just being like, you know, let's, you know, come together and enjoy, you know, what these designers are trying to say to us this season. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, and then, you know, just ushering in more equality and diversity.
Absolutely, those are you know, key and should be sort of, you know, paramount really. But that's, you know, Naomi has been a fighter of sort of diversity for a very long time.
Yeah, she does a great shout out for empowerment and mentions Black Lives Matter and Nelson Mandela. So there's some really nice links in there as well. Yeah, and just kind of welcomes everybody to kind of Fashion Week as well, which is great. And obviously, you know, great strong T-shirt on there as well, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's good. You know, on her Bentley cushions. I love
on her Bentley cushion. Because I was following her, you know, I was following her quite furiously throughout lockdown, and I think she went from New York to LA. So I think she's in LA now. I think. Sorry, because I'm quite a big Naomi fan. So
very good. Wow. And so yeah, so I mean, then sort of going forward and looking at some of the other clips as well, we had I think roughly 3 different groups of couture presentations going on there. There were just definitely some people who were quite old school and kept it very old school and didn't really relate what they were doing clearly on the film to what is happening now with raising of social consciousness and also things like sustainability, ethicalness, and all those other things which we are in the midst of, including, of course, the pandemic. And then we had some other designers who chose to talk about the craft and the skill and the making of couture clothing from beginning to end, and that journey, which has been really nice to see some of that happening backstage, as it were. And then I think there's also been other people who've really embraced the medium of the film and been incredibly progressive and really pushed things through. And just to kind of go back to the first lot, which I'm going to be calling Carry On Couture, I'm sort of thinking people like Chanel and also Dior, and there's been a lot of discussion about Dior as well, and that film. And have any of you sort of seen any of the Dior as well, and any ideas about it or any discussion about it?
Yeah, I've seen it. I was going to say just before, like, is there any context to the timelines as to when these you know, films and I guess content was made? Do we know? I mean, is there?
From my research, I think most of them, including the Dior, were created from the point of lockdown in most countries. Okay. So they have been created in the context of the conversations going on now, which is why I noticed a lot of the discussion, and rightly so, the discussion around Dior was to do with the casting, because the casting was so poor. But I noticed that they've passed it off, haven't they? They've palmed it off and said that it was an outsider company. They said the direction was by someone outside of Dior and the casting was done by someone outside of Dior. Now, I don't know whether that's entirely true. They could have hired them personally, and this could be a good way of PRing their way out of it. But it was poor because the actual film wasn't too bad. I think couture lies within that element of fantasy, like that is where couture lives. It lives in that. And Maria Grazia has always shied away from doing something too overt for the fear of it becoming costume. She's even said that in interviews, that she's worried that, or she doesn't think that clothing should be costume. And personally, I think that couture is more than just clothing. It is a form of costume, whether you see that as a dirty word or not. It is a form of costume because you're creating a narrative. So I think this was a really nice display, and the way it was presented was quite nice. I just think that the casting was tone deaf and the clothes were better than her usual output, but they still weren't as grand as what we would expect for couture from Dior.
But don't you think that we've had like enough of fantasy as well, living where we are now and in the times that we are now? I mean, I love fantasy, but I don't think it has any place in the world at the moment. I think we have to come to terms with what's going on and be progressive and move forward. I do love fantasy. Hello. But I don't think that there's a place for it in houses as big as that and as powerful as that to be doing that. And then I think really there were lots of smaller designers who were much more progressive and sort of did things which for me, which when I watched the films were much more inspiring and uplifting than something that, you know, basically could have been a Harry Potter fantasy. You know, for me, it didn't work.
Well,
I think I think visually is no. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly say I think visually I don't think there's any problem with it being necessarily too fantasy. I think that she could have woven in some more, because she's always referencing literature a lot within her collection. She put those naff quotes on all of those t-shirts, but behind those naff quotes are really intellectual pieces of literature that discuss topical themes, and that's how she gets around being contemporary subjects. And I think she perhaps could have been a bit more overt, not necessarily, I'm not talking about t-shirts, I'm talking about she could have been more overt in perhaps a press release that references literature from Black writers and all of these books that are now people are now finding and coming across, because it's contemporary. And she could have had a more diverse casting. There could have been that same visual of fantasy, because different brands do it differently. Some brands are more direct and are more aggressive with how they want to approach what they want to talk about, and some are more abstract. And I think that's where Dior lies. It's more abstract because they've got a larger audience. They want to make money from most people. Unfortunately, that's how it lies. So I think they still could have had that same level of interaction with what's going on at the moment, just through more subtle ways, so that when you look deeper into it, you find that she's actually quite an informed person. She knows what's going on with Black Lives Matter, and the casting could represent that. Do you know what I mean? It could have been done in subtle ways and still have that fantasy.
But the whole sort of thing, if she is doing that, then all the mythology that she's using is European Western mythology.
Yeah, that's so
to do with the rest
oh
of
yeah,
the
no, I get with that. This specific one, it doesn't fit. But my point of just in general having a fantasy visual, I think you can do it cleverly. Do you know what I mean?
And also, I mean, Maria's worked with, like, Chimamanda Adichie, the writer. She's worked with quite incredible, like, diverse group of feminists. So I just find it quite, like, also just, I don't know, quite confusing that this kind of film would have been commissioned and been used to show the couture collection.
Yeah, and I think the thing of using dolls and the imagery of women as dolls is a bit of like, wow. I mean, I watched it with my 19-year-old daughter, and she was really kind of horrified by the whole thing as well, because that imagery of like women as controllable dolls is just, I mean, I get the whole sort of thing that they're maquettes and they're 12s and things like that, but then, that could be in the background. It doesn't need to be in a film as well.
The thing is, I was thinking about like the role of couture houses today, and how inherently, in many aspects of what they represent and are the opposite of the evolution and trajectory of like human connection online. For instance, like all platforms right now, be that online or offline, are pushing for democratization and for making all voices heard, and even to the extent of fighting against like your own like bias, and the fact that the internet is trying to show you things so you can develop your own bias and own thoughts about confirm your own thoughts. So I think we're in a time where a few years ago those slogans were great, because they were like an easy way to inspire change and to cash in on change. But now that people are practicing change, and you have this with tons of companies like Nike or even smaller brands, it's much harder for these non-brands who kind of like live their lives by these little slogans of like feminism, like Chanel or Dior, when I look at Chanel now, do I get a sense of something? Like when I look at Dior now, do I feel like some sort of lifestyle and like meaning behind it? Not really. But when I look at like brands like Valentino, who look into themselves and are like self-aware and like mock themselves and like recontextualize what couture means now, that's when I think couture can still be valid. But if you're not fully doing a 180 and putting in the work to come back to the now, I just don't see how any couture brand, especially Dior, can make it through a time where people don't want fantasy. They want real facts, real news, real change, and stuff like that.
Well, that's part of the isolation, isn't it, of being in lockdown, is that we want something that we can grab on, that we feel that we can actually identify with and that we can be part of. With a fantasy, you can't be a part of it because it's so far removed from your reality as well. And we all want that because we've been so isolated for so long, and we all feel like we've been lied to. We've all feel that nobody's quite told us the truth about what's going on. So some facts and something that's really solid and understandable is like much more welcome. And I mean, yeah, they got it wrong. I mean, I don't think Chanel did any better. Chanel's done this kind of like very glib postcard. And again, I had a look at that. The inspiration for that is a princess debutante. And it's like, that has nothing to do with our reality that we're living through at the moment. She was a punk, great, but that was then, this is now. The way of being different then is very different to how you want, if we want people to be different now as well. So yeah, I think it's like really interesting. I mean, was there anything else? I mean, I think there was a lot of the regular couture people that did it, did the same sort of thing, like Ali Saab, Bouchara, Azaro, even Iris Van Herpen and Viali. They all did, for me, those sorts of same things that just really ignored where they are and what's going on as well. And I mean, I would say that even the couture customer living in the rarefied air that they live in are still cannot help but notice what's going on around them, because it's everywhere. The change is everywhere. So they really need to engage with it. Otherwise, you know, if you've got money, the only thing you can do is be up to date and fabulous and sort of like living those old sort of stereotypes of those looks from like 5 years ago, 2 years ago, last season. It's not going to work anymore.
To play devil's advocate, now obviously this is not necessarily explicit of my beliefs, but just to play devil's advocate, do you think that couture needs to necessarily speak to how the world is? Because we've always got to remember that couture is a very difficult conversation to have in terms of reality, because couture is so devolved from reality in terms of its cost and accessibility that it is something which only 1%, and that's not necessarily, a lot of the time it's not necessarily at fault of the designer. And I interviewed a young couturier earlier this week, and I was talking to him, and the cost of the pieces just goes up and up and up, and it's beyond what he wants to happen, but it's just to achieve that aesthetic, it goes beyond, and it becomes unachievable and unaccessible for many. So do you think that couture necessarily needs to have a conversation? Do you think we could just have pretty things for pretty things? Do you think we could just have a nice couture dress and aesthetic in this day and age?
Not anymore, because the fact is, this pandemic wasn't, you know, it wasn't like for rich or the poor. It was everyone. Everyone went through a reduction to their bare minimum. So essentially, like, if you're a luxury brand and you're trying to, you know, put out something that is going to be speaking to the same consumers that have, you know, lost family members, have lost of money, have like gone through lots of different things, I think you have to just come with a different tone. It has to be something a little bit more like, you know, I don't know, considerate. I think it's not. It's. I don't think it's. We just can't. There's. No, it's not just because it's an expensive product doesn't mean that it can't be realistic. Sorry. Yeah.
But on a more zoomed out level, even I think the only thing that couture can really grapple onto to get some sort of cultural currency and sort of authentic and quality currency to it is trying to find some sort of meaning and some sort of cultural inclusion, or even becoming like patrons and uplifting like other designers or artists or whatever. Because in this day and age, considering, you know, fast fashion and like people just like the constant overlapping paradigms of like people over consuming, spending too much on the dress, there's like the 1%, all of that. Couture for me doesn't fit into any of those dialogues, even more so when they come forth with stuff that looks like stock photos and are so completely neutral and none to any sort of meaning. I
mean, I think that's, I mean, kind of moving on from from that, and just sort of, as I said, like the second sort of group of like couturier or creations, where the people who were doing, we're working with artisans, looking at the art and the craft of couture. And also, as you were saying, Iris, there was quite a lot of reference to working with communities, how important it is that couture sort of protects these people and works with them as well. Yeah, Bella, I think, is showing, I need to be able to say this name right, Ulia Sergenko, is that right? Anybody? Okay,
is it Uliana Sergenko?
Sergenko, great.
Uliana Sergenko.
Fantastic. But and so they did a really fantastic sort of behind the scenes, looking at traditional craftsmanship for 150 years in Russia, and that was really kind of beautiful, and talking about the teamwork, and then from that, you know, to the sort of the designing, and then finally to a fashion show and some looks, and which were nice and kind of diverse and creative as well. And for me, because I'm a maker and I make clothes myself, and that's the bit that I've always enjoyed, that's really nice to kind of see that. And I think in a way to, at the moment, add value to a brand, that's one of the ways that you can kind of do it, that seems real and authentic as well. Does anybody else sort of like have any ideas about that sort of stuff? I mean, does it help to know how your garment is stitched together or not?
Well, I think for couture especially, I think couture have very specific client, because if you think about it, you only have, I don't know, 1 or 2% of the customers in the world, they purchase the couture. So I think what we used to think about the customers, they buy couture, what they would think, how the brand persuade them to buy the couture after the pandemic might be different, because I think pandemic is a very game-changing time. And also because of the pandemic, and we're entering potentially another economic recession. So, you know, the people who can afford couture, they might not be able to in the future anymore. You might have the newcomers that they're getting richer and richer because of the pandemic in certain industries, that they become the new customers for couture. So I think I really agree with KK about being more realistic and being more up to date about situations right now in the world, in terms of keep the business rolling for brand, to understand more, for example, to embrace more changes on the changing of the consumers, especially to understand what they want. Because I think for some consumers, they don't really want to know the process. They just want to see the pretty dress. But for some consumers, for example, if they are really conscious about what they purchase, they might want to know each single details. So I think it's really down to brands. They need to do the research on their consumers to see if they actually need to provide information to the consumers. So I think it's quite a targeted thing from my perspective.
And I sort of think as well that with Yulia, you know, it was all about Russian craftsmanship as well. And then there was also, I think, an Indian designer as well, Rahul Mishra, who was talking about the sort of like the embroidery communities that they had sort of set up as well, and that they were working with. So I think there was a lot of that conversation kind of going on about, I'm part of a community. I don't just stand alone. There are other people, and I've got to support those people, because without them, you know, I'm nothing as well.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else?
But the only thing I want to say is that I think people also tend to forget that not for all couture brands, but for some couture brands, having couture is to feed the core branding of a bigger company and the like ready to wear lines. Like they make these luxury lines to outline the aesthetic tones of that brand and kind of inspire consumers who can't afford that to buy the rest of the range that can then support them in as a whole as a brand. So I think for some brands like Dior, who actually make their money from those slogan t-shirts, the myth of couture being like something so close to their heart and it purely being out of devotion is not a myth, but like we have to remember that a lot of it is trying to uphold that authenticity and that pristine brand look to it.
I think, yeah, I think I agree with that entirely, because a lot of people do forget that the couture shows are essentially an advertisement. They're a very expensive, very, very expensive advertisement. When you talk about craft, I think that is the most important element of couture. Obviously, I believe in escapism with couture. I quite like that element of it. I do think it should, I think a lot of people that have produced this week either shouldn't have produced or should have spoken on more important issues, because there are more important things going on in the world than a pretty dress. But I do believe in like that element of escapism. But ultimately, couture needs to be well made. It needs to be like, if you're buying couture, it needs to be the most exquisite tailoring, the most impeccable sewing. So, and I think that also aids smaller designers, because a lot of smaller designers are able to showcase in ways that larger designers don't. So they can showcase the behind the scenes without worrying about brand identity. They can do like a live stream and showcase all their samples. So they can really embed that element of craft into it. So I think perhaps like the idea of craft to help smaller designers more than larger designers at the moment. And if out of everything we've seen, I think I would have personally preferred at this moment to have either had designers talking on issues that are current and important at the moment, or discussing how their pieces are made and discussing the element of craft, because essentially that's what they do, that's what they should be focusing on, as opposed to everything else.
Yeah, I mean, are there any other designers or anybody else? I mean, on the reference image, we're sort of watching a ribbon dress being made, and I think took 230 hours, and they sort of show it all the way to the sort of fitting fitted on a dancer, who then sort of obviously dances in it and looks amazing in it. But I mean, it's kind of quite nice. There was quite a few of those sorts of sort of films out there as well, from beginning to end as well. Yeah, it's just nice to sort of see it every now and again, and to remember what, you know, all of it's based on. But obviously, you know, we all buy from different brands and from different labels for different reasons. You know, we all have associations that are more than just the clothing. And that's why we kind of buy into them as well. But it's nice to get back, you know, back to the roots of it all, and back to the basics as well. And then, the third sort of like group of designers that would be kind of nice to talk about as well would be the ones that really embraced the technology and kind of really went for it, and spoke about what's happening, spoke about their experiences, and hopefully, you know, the collective experience that we're all sort of part of on some level as well. And I think probably the ones that did it the best, and if Bella, we can have a look at actually the one that Bella's showing as well, is I think a Japanese designer who asked people to give them their shirts, and then he did this really amazing process of having one-to-ones with everybody and talking about how they felt about the garment, what it meant to them, what was their likes and their dislikes about their bodies, themselves, and clothes. And then he transformed these 25 shirts into couture pieces. And it's a really beautiful way, and a way I think that we're all going to have to work with each other via Zoom, via technology as we are now. And it's a really beautiful example of all of that as well. And I mean, I know myself, I'm working with clients via sort of like the internet. And what's really nice is you get those things where the cat jumps by, or, you know, there's a child screaming in the background. And there's all this other stuff that actually adds value to the way that you deal with people online as well, because it's so much more informal. You know, it's not a shop thing where you're behind a counter. You've got that barricade between yourself and them, and you're literally in somebody's home talking to them as well. So I thought that was like really, really beautiful, and I thought the way that they dealt with it and everything and what they made was like really incredible. And I think the one that really sort of stood out most of all was Victor and Rolf. And did any of you see the Victor and Rolf as well? It was really funny. It was playful. It was humorous. They really nailed it. They had a whole like 1950s couture show, and it was just 9 garments, 3 in each kind of section or look. The first was somber, just to reflect the times that we're in, and there was 3 different looks for that spoke to it. And then there was the middle section was about anxiety and the internet, and then the third one was about love. So it was really beautiful. Have you seen any of that? Have you anybody seen that at all? I mean, the collection is called Change. It's just up on the references at the moment, but it is like really, it's really wonderful, and the voiceover is really great and very witty.
Yeah, the voiceover is actually Mika. Do you know the singer, which I thought was quite a nice addition. But did you notice that I think it sounded almost identical to John Galliano's podcasts? So John Galliano does a podcast for each season, and he talks through it in exactly the same way, look by look. Or if the collection for Margiela goes through a series of stages, he talks through it in stages and talks through the narrative and where his mind was. And I really appreciate those podcasts. I think they're fantastic.
And so this is the first of the somber, and this is blue, and she's got embroidered rain clouds just to to show the somber mood that everybody's kind of in at the moment as well. And then this one, it was I'm trying to remember what this robe was amazing as well. But I think this is all about being austere and sort of, being warm and comfortable, but also being austere in what we are at the moment as well. It was great. Nobody saw it. Okay. Do you mind if I?
Did you not think that? I mean, as it's up on the screen, the rest of you can see it. But did you not think it looked a bit? I'd hate to say this because I never like to slate too much, but looks a bit B-Tech, just because of some of the fabrics. It looks very
Yeah, I think so. I think it looks crunchy, and I think it looks, sort of very costume. But I think that the honesty and the wit and integrity that was done with was great. There was heart. And I mean, that last outfit with all the spikes is obviously about you protecting yourself, but also social distancing because nobody can get close to you because you've got spikes on as well. And then this one is the emoji dress, which I know they've kind of referenced things like this before. So it's during this time of anxiety, which emoji are you, which do you identify with, and are you happy once, or angry the next, or frustrated the next as well? But I mean, I think it was nice commentary on all sorts of things as well. I
think the commentary was the best.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think the commentary and the way it was displayed was the best part about it. But that slip dress, unfortunately for me, it looks like it could be £5 in Primark. It could be a 90. From 2015. I guess it gets people talking. This look here, look 5, was the only one I really liked because I think it's really well made. I quite like the silhouette. It's in keeping with what they've done previously. But I think that's the one. This look here is the one that looks most finessed, I guess, refined. I mean, it has a nice silhouette to it, but the rest of them look a bit clunky, and I get that gets people talking. I understand.
Look at that one. Look, you're going to go next to that. Look, you saw somebody coming down the street. You're definitely social distance. So job done. There's couture working. I like it. But I think the thing is that the other thing that also grated with me is that all of the materials that they used were man-made. So it was man-made silks, leatherette, it was all this sort of stuff as well. And I mean, it would have been good to have seen the show notes on that for the reason why they chose those materials rather than sort of silks or organic based materials as well. But I mean, and this is them in their love collection, because obviously who doesn't want to be loved, and let's include everybody, let's be diverse. So I thought that was great. But again, it's on a really sort of polyester silk. So not what you associate strictly with couture, but I mean it's the whole package, which is great.
Yeah, I'm semi-skeptical. I think what you touched on is really important in terms of fabrics and where people are getting fabrics from, and a lot of people aren't releasing their press releases, which is really annoying because I'd like to know that information. But I am very skeptical at the moment with that because I know that lots of people are finding it difficult to get fabrics, so they're then twisting it. And I'm very used to, especially working within sustainability, people greenwashing and very used to people PRing things to sound better than they are. But I read a press release, I can't remember who it was, and they were like, oh, we got all our fabrics from local factories, local places. And it's well, you couldn't get them from anywhere else. You had no option to. I mean, it's a great spin, but it would be great if these companies had been more considerate over what fabrics they were using prior to this. And then I'd have a bit more appreciation for their sentiment when they're using locally sourced fabric and upcycled fabric. I think it's great that they're doing so now, but and if they can do it in an intellectual manner, I think that's great. But I think it would have been great to see it beforehand with some places. I know Margiela did it a couple of seasons ago, so I can see consistency there. But with some brands, they're just doing it because they haven't got any other option, let's be honest, and they need a good PR spin.
Well, I mean, and the king of all of this as well for the past few seasons of couture is obviously Roland van der Kamp, who's obviously, you know, and amazing what they do as well, where they use the same materials and the same clothing over and over again and sort of remake it into new things as well. And this season as well, their film showed that process, sort of was a very kind of fly on the wall almost, sort of like looking at how they get inspiration, how they put everything together. But I mean, you know, Roland's van der Kamp has been doing this for a while, where they, you know, get, you know, ethical fabrics, or they use, you know, they find something which is given to them and then they turn it into some clothing, and then that clothing is changed next season and next season and next season, which is kind of really radical and was very outside when it was happening about 4 or 5 seasons ago. It's kind of like, what are they doing? But now seems so pertinent and so right now as well. And again with Roland as well, it was very moody. You can see them jumping around in the background, but I think they're showing sort of like the clothes they've made as well, and just vignettes of it. So in some ways, actually, they've got a bit of everything, where they have a bit of the sort of like fashion postcard, but then they also talk about the process. And then at the end, there is the social sort of message about inclusivity and sustainability and all the things that we want to hear at the moment as well. Does anybody else know the label or have any opinion on that label?
It's my first time seeing it.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting process what they do as well.
Yeah, because they also use old I don't know whether it's just recent collections, but as far as I'm aware, they use old garments and old toiles from previous seasons. And I think I believe there's like validity in reshowing and showing and reshowing your clothes, because you've put a lot of work into those collections. So if a look is successful, perhaps carry it over to the next season. But why remake it if you're going to use exactly the same look? Include it in the new collection and then build around that if you want to create a different narrative based off one element. But in their case, they're obviously taking garments that weren't used or weren't successful and toiles and upcycling them. And I think that's quite, especially within couture, because you can only make 3 garments for it to be defined as specifically couture. So by reusing one of those, if it wasn't successful, I think that's a really good use of expensive fabric.
I think also, like, my issue with all of these fashion films, like Collection Showcase specifically, is that you've got a whole collection that you've worked on for months that showcase like a train of thought and a feeling, and then you come up with people walking in the clothing with nothing special really happening. And it's just like, I just feel like it's really not compelling to me to have this couture, but then not really have anything else really. I feel like there could be, like, the way Balenciaga just in general like showcases its clothing, be it via social media, on runway or anything else, is so much more interesting and fun because it says things and it gives different contexts and different like meanings to things, or even like smaller brands. But all of this is just so like naive and boring to me, and I just don't understand. So yeah.
I mean, because I've previously said off, I wanted to mention Balmain, but I mean, you've made that a really, really good link, because they are a brand that lives on social media, or in recent years they live on social media. And their show, I thought, I mean, it wasn't anything crazy. Couture can really, I mean, there's certain restrictions in how you can show a collection. I mean, it's great when people do things that are more innovative, but obviously it was shown on a boat and it was shown down a canal, and everyone, the audience were the streets of Paris, and you had all these little QR codes around the streets, and people scanned them on TikTok, and then were able to film it, and it was live streamed on TikTok. Now the live stream actually went down about, I think it was like a quarter of the way through. However, within that time, they amassed an extra 15,000 followers. Now, obviously, followers doesn't always equate to sales, but that's 15,000 people's eyes that are then going to be on the new collections. Do you know what I mean? So there's real validity in this. And I was very skeptical with TikTok and social media or new social media such as TikTok that was very frivolous. But I can definitely see the relevance of it now, especially in reaching new audiences and younger audiences and Gen Z. So I think that what they did with Balmain was really it wasn't anything crazy, but it worked. And the collection was really quite nice in terms of silhouette. It wasn't anything wild. It was similar to previous collections, but it was what you would expect from a couture collection. Because I think this season, I think people should have either done nothing at all, or, well, actually, personally, I think the context of everything, don't think there's relevance in clothing at all. I think everyone should have just paused till next season. But like, if you are going to show and you're insistent on showing, show something good. Do you know what I mean? Show something that's made well, that's interesting silhouettes. And I think Balmain was consistent with the brand identity and did that. And it was a really quite nice show. Look at the images on the canal. It looks like an extravagant experience.
Yeah, but also even like what you're saying, the idea that they're recontextualizing the way that haute couture is put out. So even like the way those images are shot are kind of like referencing like the way that like an iPhone would take a picture, like it kind of looks like fisheye, and just like so many more things are much more interesting than having like the boring normal shot on like a really professional camera of like some model walking in and out of some old palace room. And what you said about like TikTok and Balmain doing that, it's funny because I did not notice Balmain for many seasons, and this show, honestly, I was like, not bad, this is cute. So it worked on me.
I think it's quite nice them being all on the scene. I think there is something about that. That feels very kind of positive and like looking sort of positively into the future that it feels like. I'm never really a big fan of Balmain clothes, especially when it comes to couture, but I think this was a really good sort of way to show a collection that doesn't feel inauthentic.
Was there anything else? I mean, does anybody know when, I think Balenciaga were meant to be showing. Do we know when that's meant to be happening at all? Does anybody have any ideas on that? Anybody from Oscreen? And shall we talk about the other presentations that haven't been with Margiela and Valentino as well? Iris, did you want to talk about Valentino?
Well, yeah, Valentino, well, like for instance, Margiela and Valentino are both brands that have looked at themselves in the face and like realized that it's either a time to adapt, and also not only a time to adapt, but to acknowledge that young people have money now and can afford couture. So making couture shows that are appealing to a younger audience has proven fruitful to them, and also so much more interesting to me. I think Valentino's choice to like make a video with a symbol, like a person like FKA Twigs, who is like a big symbol of the now and represents a lot, is an easy way, in a good way, to just kind of like say something without having to, you know, think about all the constant, like, it's just, they're choosing to incorporate someone who represents kind of like our generation, different values, maybe more of our generation than other brands might do, like for instance, Dior. Obviously everyone, you know, you can always do more for a brand and do more to be more relevant. But I think it's a good start for a season that's so like troubled and with so much uncertainty. I think the choice of making like a creative video that conveys something and that displays interesting technological technique and like practice is interesting in a time where there's not, like, that's what's going to elevate your clothing to something more meaningful, I think.
Gareth, did you want to talk about Balenciaga or anybody at all as well, about anything else that's coming up?
I kind of want to express my opinion about this couture fashion week in general.
Sure.
I just think, because I was looking through all the collections last minute, and I think it feels a little bit rushed. Maybe because of the time, it's been very sensitive. Everybody is very cautious about what they do, what they create, image-wise or creatively, how they're going to deliver the information. It's exactly like Dior. They dropped the fashion film about haute couture, and suddenly it went backlash on social media. So I think a lot of brands, they sort of it seems like it's scared about what they can do, but they're forced themselves to deliver a haute couture collection just because they want to be more engaged with the internet or the industry. So I actually don't have many opinions on certain brands, but I think in general, just this couture fashion week, after seeing all the collections, for me, it just seems pretty forced. It seems that it's nothing very special, from my opinion, because it doesn't reflect the situation. It doesn't really bring something new either. And also, I think when we talk about technologies, I do think that they didn't utilize technology fully, as maybe they should, maybe to carefully plan it and to deliver something more advanced. But it didn't when it's supposed to.
Great. And I mean, I think that the main thing as well, and the reason we're here, is that nobody quite knew what the response was going to be from the couture houses this season as well. And to have so many people making films, I think was quite a surprise as well. Because at first it was kind of looking that it might be only 3 or 4 of the main houses, but I'm not sure how many, because I've not counted, but there's a good 30, 40 sort of shows online. So I think that's kind of, that is quite impressive and quite incredible as well, and that the whole of it is virtual or online now is kind of, it's a way to kind of start. Yeah, I mean, I think fashion is always rushed. I think fashion, because of the nature, and especially, what maybe hopefully we're saying goodbye to, with like 4 collections or 6 collections a year. No matter what anybody did, it was always going to be like run, catch up. I think it's just that what they really need to think about is, what is the message, and the only context that you have is what people see. And so, even if people have never known what the brand was about or what it's made before, it's what you see in front of you is all that you have to judge that label on as well. And I think they really need to come to terms with that more than anything else as well, definitely. KK, have you got any thoughts on the couture?
I mean, I think that like couture has always served as a way for us to look beyond like what is capable, our capabilities, allowing us to, in a way dream. And dreaming is still very much important. But I feel like, it's not, I think also, I think people need to look at, look at the, not even really say look at what's going on around you, but also just like really understand what, as a brand, really maybe gauge how people feel, or the feeling that you as a brand should feel, if that makes any sense. Sorry, I'm just rambling, because I feel like a lot of people are doing things that don't feel true to them, or don't feel in line with, what is happening in the world, and also their customers. And I think that's because, yes, not the mass public aren't really buying couture, but the couture needs the mass public and the interest and the social media and the clicks and everything and all that kind of like whirlwind. It needs it to be propped up to like kind of, have this kind of level of engagement that will kind of that can reach a sort of a wider audience. So I think it's just a lot of inner work. People need to like look inwards more and just not necessarily put things out when things aren't ready. Yeah.
Because I think that's the thing, isn't it? Nobody really knows how long the pandemic's going to last.
Exactly. There isn't really any
there's
kind
no
of
pressure.
Yeah, there's no like, and and also I think maybe the CEOs are saying you have to do this now or you have to do this now, but I mean, surely if if everyone has had to pause, I mean, I feel like as a as a brand, you should also like take a minute to really just reevaluate what you're trying to say and what your releases are saying. I'm sure lots of people, everyone's had to do this, you know.
Well, and then especially when sustainability in all its forms underlines everything that's going on at the moment. And if people are just being pushed, then they've missed it altogether. They've not understood what anything's about at all, and they've completely missed it. And it's going to come across as being inauthentic.
Yeah, and like, you know, and also having conversations with people. I just feel like a lot of these companies don't really want to have any conversations. I feel like they just want, you know, they just kind of want to just maybe sort of, I don't know, continue in a careful way. But I think it's really about talking to people, you know, who are, you know, who maybe it's talking to a fan or someone who's like, you know, someone who follows the brand on socials, and, you know, and also contrasting that with a conversation with a couture client, just to gauge kind of, you know, really what people are feeling. And, you know, I don't know, like, I mean, I have, you know, family members who are just, you know, some wealthy, some not, friends who are just not interested in clothes at the moment. They don't want to know. That's not really where they're looking. They can't afford to buy things, but they just don't want to. You know, they maybe see more value in other things. I think it's really about just trying to, you know, that's why, like, in keeping with that kind of, you know, energy, you know, I think brands need to move. They just need to reevaluate how they, you know, their processes.
Yeah. Iris or Joshua, did you have anything else to add?
I think a really good thing to add to, like, bouncing off of what you just said, KK, is I think that someone who did something well was Iris van Herpen. I think that what she did is perhaps what would have been a more relevant response from couture houses, because she only released one look. It was one singular look. It was indicative of everything you would expect from couture. So it had the finery. It was made of the best materials. It was hand sewn. Like, there's everything you would expect from a couture garment. There was only one of them. There wasn't this strain or stress or pressure to release the whole collection. And yet, in that one look alone, it epitomizes what she would want from a vision that could be expanded to a whole collection, which showcases really this elite layer of designers, someone that's able to do something, epitomize what the whole collection means in one look. Because the look itself, if you look into it, it basically is the same upside down. So from top to bottom, it's identical. So you could wear it either way, essentially, if you wanted to. Obviously, there are shaping regards to fit, but obviously on a fit model, they rarely have boobs and a bum. So it's most likely going to fit upside down. But everything about it in terms of design is the same. And the idea is, she was looking at this artist called MC Escher, who's a Dutch artist. And sorry, I'm looking at my laptop now. And basically the idea of it was there's no negative or positive. So you can have positive on one end and negative on another. And it was to epitomize the way of the world at the moment. It's obviously a very abstract construct that she's talking about. There's no deep-rooted reality in this. There's no nitty-gritty that she's talking about. But I think it's a really interesting conversation that she's discussing, in that we could see this moment as a very negative place where everything just stops, but we could see it as, there's a positive to everything. There's always a flip side to it. And obviously there's a much deeper, you should have a look at basically the press release and everything to do with that, because it's really quite interesting. But she also released videos that go into the craft of it. But I mean, there's so much content from one look, and she's a big house, and she's known for doing some of the best couture. And I think that was the best response, that you don't need to create a whole collection. You don't need to force a manual labor from masses of people to do unachievable things in lockdown, that you can just produce one look and that be enough. And it speaks to your...
She's got the woman from Game of Thrones modeling her, she plays the Red Witch in Game of Thrones, right?
Okay, that makes a big difference.
But also,
yeah,
I think, like, I was gonna say this at the start, but specifically for Iris van Herpen, she looks at herself and looks at the core of her own brand so much that, like, she's got it so figured out that she kind of knows how she wants to express it and for it to feel authentic. Like, I feel like there's a double dialogue where you've got brands like Chanel and Dior that talk about parts of society and the systems and intricacies of society, but then don't really want to engage with a progression beyond what they feel comfortable with. So with them, it's like feminism, but then when that goes beyond and talks about the other parts of, like, intersectional feminism or even Black Lives Matter, they're kind of like, well, we're feminists. But then for Iris Herpen, I would find it quite weird that a brand whose collections are inspired by MC Escher, jellyfish, mud, like nature, I'd find it kind of weird that from one collection to another, it go from abstract vision of the world and thoughts to like some really socially, culturally engaged dialogue. So I think it's a lot about brands just reflecting on who they are, keeping it as authentic as possible, but also they have to realize that right now that fantasy that they're always talking about and about like couture, accessible emerging designers are actually creating fantasies that are just as enticing but also more accessible and real. So like brands like Telfar, for instance, are really making a new perception of fantasy that's much more engaging and much more layered than
and has a social consciousness and is uplifting and conscious raising for everybody who's in the audience watching it as well. And that's incredible. And that's, any art form, which fashion should be in its purest, should be able to do that. You should be able to see it and feel uplifted, feel loved, feel what they're feeling and what their intentions were as well. And now more than ever we need that.
Yeah, because some we need to be, as I said, we need to be able to dream, but it has to be positive. You don't want a nightmare.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. I mean, is there anything else? Because otherwise I will end the panel now. Is everybody sufficed with what they had to say?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, fine. Well, thank you all for being here. So thank you to all the panelists and thank you all for watching. For more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit SHOWstudio.com. And if you're watching via SHOWstudio's YouTube, and be sure to like, comment, subscribe below, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
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 Come on.